Welcome. This is a story about my friend Sebastian, the doctor who swore he'd never cross the line between care and feeling, until he met the one patient who made him forget every rule. Sophie's heart drew in a slow, uneven breath as she waited in the crowded hospital lobby, her eyes sliding past empty plastic chairs and the worn, worried faces of other people who were just as nervous as she was. The sharp hospital smell of disinfectant lingered in the air, every now and then mixed with a lighter hint of antiseptic soap. Above her, the fluorescent lights hummed softly, throwing a cold brightness over the pale walls and polished floor. She tugged her cardigan tighter around herself, as if fabric could stand in for courage. Her best friend Mia sat right beside her, one hand resting on Sophie's shoulder, the other holding a patient, reassuring smile. "It's just a routine breast screening," Mia said, her voice low but steady, the way people talk to someone who's on the edge. There was real warmth in Mia's eyes, the kind that said she understood more than she was saying, and Sophie was thankful for it. Even so, pushing away the fear chewing at her from the inside was not something she could just decide to do. Her mind jumped back to a day a few months earlier, when her fingers had brushed over a small, unfamiliar lump under her skin. Panic had shot through her then, sharp and immediate, dragging up an old memory she had worked very hard to bury. Her mother's fight with breast cancer still hung over her life like a shadow, showing up whenever she looked in the mirror or even heard the word, "Doctor." She hadn't told Mia everything yet. The whole story still sat in her throat, too heavy to speak. She had put this appointment off more than once, secretly hoping the lump would disappear and let her pretend nothing was wrong. It hadn't. So now she was here, finally facing the possibility of hearing something she didn't want to hear, and her palms were starting to sweat. "But what if my doctor is a man?" Sophie asked, barely above a whisper, flicking a nervous glance toward the door that led deeper into the hospital. From somewhere down the hallway, she could hear the steady beeping of machines, doors sliding open and shut, and low voices that made the whole place feel even more clinical. Mia looked at her with open sympathy. "I swear, Sophie, whoever examines you has seen everything there is to see," she said. "This is literally their job. They're here to help you, not to make you feel weird." That kind of logic worked fine on people who weren't terrified of being seen. But Sophie had spent most of her life trying to stay small and unnoticed, so to her it felt huge. Just picturing herself lying on a table, while a stranger in gloves examined a part of her body she barely let herself think about made her want to crawl out of her skin. Right then a nurse stepped into the waiting area and called her name. Her voice was calm and professional, slicing through the low chatter like it was nothing. Mia squeezed Sophie's hand once, quick and encouraging, and Sophie forced herself to stand up. Her legs felt weak as she followed the nurse down the long hallway. Every step felt like walking toward the edge of a board over deep water. In the exam room, her heart was pounding. The nurse pointed her toward the table with practiced efficiency and told her the doctor would be in shortly. The door clicked shut behind her, and Sophie was suddenly alone in a bright, sterile room that smelled very clean and very cold. She swallowed hard and stared up at the overhead light glinting off the metal tools on the tray. In her mind she pictured an older doctor, someone in his late 50s, who would be brisk and detached and not really looking at her, just at the chart. When the door opened, Sophie lost her breath. Standing there wasn't some gray-haired veteran doctor. It was Dr. Sebastian Quinn, young, tall, completely self-possessed. His dark hair was neatly cut, and his cool gray eyes landed on her with a look that was professional but, somehow, not unfriendly. The white coat only made his shoulders look broader and his posture even more controlled, like he belonged in every room he walked into. Even the way he moved had precision, measured, athletic, the quiet ease of someone who took care of his body without ever needing to show it off. The fabric of his coat shifted slightly when he reached for her chart, revealing the lean strength beneath the calm exterior. Heat rushed to Sophie's face under his steady, unhurried attention. A wave of embarrassment crashed over her, and for a second she honestly thought about bolting. But as if he could tell how rattled she was, he offered a small, kind smile. "Good afternoon, Miss Hart," he said, his voice smooth and even. "I'm Dr. Quinn. We're going to do your screening today, all right?" She could only nod. Words were stuck somewhere between her chest and her mouth. Even that little nod reminded her how tense her neck and shoulders were. "Noticing it, Dr." Quinn guided her toward the table with an ease that didn't feel pushy. He talked her through the process step by step, telling her what he was going to do, how long it would take, and what she might feel. His calm, matter-of-fact tone helped, at least a little. Sophie lay back, trying hard not to let the nerves show in the way her body trembled. Instinctively, she kept her arms close to her sides, not wanting to expose more than she absolutely had to. When his gloved hand touched her shoulder first, then moved carefully to the area he needed to examine, she braced for it to feel clinical and cold. But his touch was careful and controlled, never rough or careless, and that eased her more than she expected. "So far, so good," he said a couple of times, keeping his voice low and soothing. "If anything feels uncomfortable, tell me right away." Sophie managed a soft, "Okay," her cheeks still burning. If Mia were in the room, she would probably roll her eyes and remind Sophie, gently, that this was normal and doctors weren't thinking anything weird. Sophie breathed in slowly, and tried to separate her fear from the medical reality of what was happening. When he finished the first part of the exam, Dr. Quinn rolled his stool back and turned to the computer to type his notes. "I did feel something I want to look at more closely," he said after a moment, his voice staying steady. "It's a small lump. It could be a fibroadenoma. Those are very common and usually benign. But I'd like to run a couple of extra tests to make sure." Her stomach dropped. There it was. The word. Lump. Even though he followed it with benign, her mind was already racing ahead to every worst-case scenario. Her mother's story rose up again, blotting out all the reasonable parts. He must have seen that flicker of fear in her eyes, because he softened his tone. "I don't want you to worry, Miss Hart," he said. "In 2 weeks, we'll do an ultrasound and get a clearer picture. It's always better to know for sure." Sophie sat up and crossed her arms over her chest like she needed a shield, trying to push down the panic rolling through her. The bright light overhead, the tray of instruments, the doctor watching her with real concern, all of it suddenly felt too sharp. He handed her the paper listing her follow-up appointment. "Take this to the front desk on your way out. And if anything changes or you start to worry, just call us. You don't have to go through this alone." She nodded again, because forming full sentences felt impossible. Her brain was a mess of her mother's face, the fear of getting sick, and the strange warmth she felt whenever Dr. Quinn looked at her like she mattered. She muttered a thank you and slipped out, her legs still unsteady. Outside, the cool autumn air hit her cheeks and brought her back to the real world for a second. Dried leaves scooted across the sidewalk, and the sound made her think of old memories she didn't want, like hospital hallways and her mother's smile that had looked tired toward the end. She had always hated hospitals, the way everything was too clean and too controlled, yet here she was again. Thinking a coffee might help her breathe, Sophie walked into her favorite cafe near the bookstore where she worked. The smell of fresh coffee and warm pastry wrapped around her as soon as she stepped inside. Normally the soft clatter of cups and the cozy lighting calmed her down. Today her nerves were still buzzing. She scanned the room for an empty table or someone she knew. Then her eyes landed on someone she definitely knew, Dr. Sebastian Quinn. This time he wasn't in a white coat. just a crisp shirt and perfectly tailored pants, sitting by the window, lazily stirring his coffee. For one wild second, she thought about pretending she hadn't seen him and walking right back out. Her gaze even jumped to the door. Escape was an option. Too late. He looked up. Their eyes met, and she saw recognition right away. A small, polite smile tugged at his mouth, and he gave a short nod. "Oh, hello, Miss Hart," he said, sounding genuinely pleased and a little surprised. "Didn't expect to run into you here." Sophie froze, clutching the strap of her purse like it could steady her. "Hi, Dr. Quinn," she said, hoping her voice didn't betray how flustered she was. He studied her for a second, probably checking how nervous she still was. "You work nearby?" he asked. "Yes," she said, motioning toward the shop next door. "I work at the bookstore. Part-time." Interest sparked in his eyes. "Nice. Do you want to sit for a minute? I have a little time before I go back." Sophie felt both trapped and oddly seen. She glanced at her watch. She could spare a few minutes. Sure. For a bit. She sat down across from him, trying to keep her breathing even. He gave her that same calm, confident smile she'd seen in the exam room. That brought the whole earlier scene back into her head, including the part where his hands had found the lump without hesitation. Her face grew hot again, so she grabbed the menu just to have something in her hands. "I didn't expect to see you outside the hospital," she blurted out. He laughed quietly. "Doctors need caffeine too," he said. "Honestly, I'm a little addicted. A friend told me about this place, and now I come here whenever I can." His casual tone made the whole thing feel normal. She relaxed a little. He didn't talk to her like a patient. He talked to her like a regular person. They chatted for a few minutes about her job at the bookstore, how she loved classic novels, and how satisfying it was to help people find the right book. Dr. Quinn listened like he cared, asking her small follow-up questions and even mentioning a couple of authors he used to read when he actually had time. Time slipped faster than she realized. When her phone buzzed with a reminder for her shift, Sophie jumped like she'd been caught doing something wrong. "I should get going," she said, fumbling with her phone. "I'll see you at your next appointment," he told her, and there was something softer in the way he said it. "And, Sophie, thanks for talking with me." She walked away feeling strangely light, though confusion twisted beneath that relief. Why would a man like Dr. Quinn, young, confident, and far too composed, care about her rambling on about books? The next 2 weeks blurred into a rhythm of fear and cautious hope. He'd said lumps in younger women were often harmless, and logically she clung to that. But logic had never stood much chance against memory, especially the memory of her mother's final months, the sterile corridors, the hushed calls to specialists, the quiet dread that had followed them everywhere. When the morning of her follow-up finally came, Sophie felt the nerves in her stomach tighten into knots. The ultrasound room was bright, the air humming with machines. Dr. Quinn moved with a calm assurance that was becoming familiar. "This might feel a little cold," he said, as he pressed the probe gently against her skin. The gel sent a shiver through her, and she tried not to flinch. He studied the monitor with the focus of someone used to seeing fear and wanting to quiet it. Each second dragged, her eyes locked on his face, desperate to catch any sign of concern. Then he exhaled slowly and turned toward her. "It looks consistent with a benign fibroadenoma," he said, a faint smile easing the words. "Nothing suggests malignancy." Relief hit her so hard it felt physical. Her throat tightened, eyes stung. She blinked fast. Dr. Quinn wordlessly handed her a tissue, and all she could manage was a shaky, "Thank you." He explained her next options: regular monitoring or a simple procedure to remove it. She nodded through the fog of gratitude, already wanting to leave, to breathe something that didn't smell like antiseptic. But when she moved to stand, her shoelace snagged on the step. She lurched forward with a startled gasp. Before she could hit the floor, Dr. Quinn's arms were around her, steady, warm, solid. The scent of his cologne, the press of his chest, it all froze her for a split second. Their eyes met, close enough for her to feel the heat of his breath. Gratitude tangled with something far less clinical. She broke away fast, cheeks burning. "Sorry, I'm fine," she stammered, trying not to trip again. He gave a small laugh, gentle enough to take the edge off her embarrassment. "I'm glad you're okay. Please be careful." She nodded, clutching the discharge papers like a lifeline, mumbling another thank you before hurrying out. Her pulse still raced as she stepped into the hallway. No matter how far she walked, the feeling of his arms steadying her wouldn't leave. The following week vanished in a haze of mixed feelings, relief that her scare was over, and a gnawing awareness that Dr. Sebastian Quinn wasn't just another doctor. She couldn't pinpoint what made him different. Maybe it was the calm way he spoke, or that spark of quiet warmth in his eyes. One restless night, unable to sleep, Sophie started scrolling through articles on her phone. Her thumb froze over a headline, asterisk, "Quinn Medical Group, a rising powerhouse in private healthcare," asterisk. Curiosity pushed her to tap. The article detailed a sprawling network of hospitals and clinics built by the Quinn family, a billion-dollar enterprise that had made them one of the wealthiest names in medicine. The youngest heir, Dr. Sebastian Quinn, was described as both brilliant and unusually compassionate, choosing to keep practicing instead of hiding in corporate offices. A photo accompanied the piece. Dr. Quinn in a dark tailored suit, standing at a charity gala for breast cancer research. The same thoughtful gray eyes, but this time serious, reserved, more heir than doctor. He was described as asterisk, "the kind-hearted heir, a surgeon whose empathy for patients set him apart." Asterisk. Sophie's stomach flipped. He's a billionaire heir, she realized. And no matter how much she told herself it shouldn't matter, it did. A few days later, just as Sophie was trying to convince herself that all of it had been nothing more than a brief flutter of emotion, her phone buzzed in the middle of her evening shift at the bookstore. The screen lit up with a name, Dr. Sebastian Quinn. She froze. The message was short, but far too personal to read without her fingers trembling. Asterisk. "I know I shouldn't text you outside the hospital, but you've been on my mind more than I expected. I just wanted to make sure you're doing all right." Asterisk. Her heart thudded hard in her chest. He'd been thinking about her? The real Dr. Quinn, always composed, always in control, had written to her like this, as if he simply couldn't help himself. She reread the message several times, trying to come up with a response, but never sent one. In the end, she just set the phone face down, as if that could hide the feeling it had stirred. She worked part-time in a bookstore. She lived quietly, read old novels, and never went anywhere she might have to introduce herself twice. The idea of him attending black-tie galas, shaking hands with polished donors and CEOs, it made her feel small. So she pulled away. When Dr. Quinn's office emailed about the optional removal procedure, she politely declined. When they called, she told the assistant she was fine, that there was no need for further appointments. She even avoided the cafe, afraid she'd see him there again. But each time she dodged a call, something in her chest tightened. She missed his calm voice more than she wanted to admit. Days passed. Then one slow afternoon, the bell above the bookstore door chimed. Sophie looked up, and her heart stuttered. Dr. Quinn stood there. He moved with purpose between the shelves until he reached her counter. "Sophie," he said quietly, concern etched into every syllable. "Why have you been avoiding my calls?" Her fingers tightened around the edge of a hard cover. I didn't think there was a reason for more tests, she said too formally. He frowned slightly. You and I both know that isn't the truth. The overhead lights caught the focus in his eyes, the quiet authority she'd seen before. He wasn't just a doctor now. He was Sebastian Quinn, the man she'd read about, the one who could buy entire hospital chains yet still show up to check on a single patient. How could she explain what it felt like to realize they lived in completely different worlds? She took a breath. I read about you, she admitted. Your family business. The Quinn Medical Group. The expansion projects, the charity work, all of it. He nodded once, waiting. And that made you decide not to come back? Her fingers twisted against the counter. We don't belong in the same world. I'd only embarrass myself. His reply came quiet but firm. That's not your call to make. Sophie froze, startled by the conviction in his tone. He stepped closer, his voice lowering to something intimate. Do you really think your background matters to me? Yes, my family has money, but that's not who I am. What matters is why you're pushing me away. Every emotion she'd buried came rushing back. The gratitude, the comfort, the way his calm presence had steadied her, the way her chest tightened when he looked at her. Her lips parted, words trembling out before she could stop them. I was afraid. Sebastian exhaled softly and moved closer still, until the distance between them all but vanished. The noise of the store seemed to fade, leaving only the thrum of her heart in her ears. Tell me, he said gently. Sophie hesitated, but something in his steady, sincere gaze drew the truth out of her. I'm afraid you'll realize I'm not special, she admitted quietly. That my life's too ordinary. And if things had gone wrong, if that lump had turned out to be something worse. Her voice faltered, memories of her mother's final days flashing sharp and merciless. I just didn't want to drag you into all that. Sebastian looked as if Sophie's words had struck something deep within him. Then, slowly, he reached out. The warmth of his palm against her cheek broke through every layer of fear she'd been clinging to. I'm not leaving, he said quietly, each word deliberate. You're not pulling me into anything I don't choose. And your background, Sophie, your money, your job, none of that matters to me. A faint smile touched his lips. You're kind. You face your fears even when you think you can't. You talk about books like they're sacred. Why would I ever want to walk away from that? Sophie's heartbeat pounded so hard it drowned out everything else. She wanted to respond but couldn't. There it was, a choice staring her down. Run again. Or stop running. At last, she nodded. I'm sorry, she whispered. It's just been a lot. I thought I could handle it alone. Sebastian gave a slow, relieved nod. Then let's handle what comes next together. Your options. Your questions. No more facing this by yourself. We'll plan the procedure when you're ready. Something in his tone dismantled the last wall she'd built. She let him guide her forward. True to his word, Sebastian and his team arranged everything. Fear still flickered sometimes, but each time he spoke to her, it burned a little less. On the morning of the surgery, Mia came along, glowing with the confidence Sophie couldn't find in herself. Sebastian appeared just before the procedure, dressed in scrubs, calm and focused. Seeing him steadied her more than she expected. You're in good hands, Mia teased, stepping aside so he could take Sophie's hand. The operating table felt impossibly cold, but the last thing Sophie remembered before the anesthesia took hold was his quiet whisper near her ear. Breathe easy, Sophie. You'll be fine. I promise. Darkness followed, soft, absolute. When she awoke, the first thing she saw was the overhead light, and then Sebastian, seated beside her, holding her hand. It went perfectly, he said softly. The lump was benign, just like we hoped. No complications. Relief crashed over her like a wave. Her hands trembled, tears sliding unchecked. He squeezed her fingers, steady and silent, anchoring her. Through the haze of exhaustion and emotion, clarity bloomed. When she looked at him now, her chest tightened, but not from fear. He brushed a strand of hair from her forehead, his eyes warm and impossibly gentle. "I've tried to stay professional," he murmured, "but I can't keep pretending. I don't just care about you as a patient, Sophie. I care about you." Her breath caught. "Sebastian," she whispered, tears spilling again. Gratitude, affection, relief, all tangled together. Words failed her, so she only squeezed his hand in return. "I care about you too." The smile that crossed his face was soft and certain, the kind that said everything else could wait. A year later, Sophie Hart stood in the same hospital corridor that had once terrified her. The lights were still too bright, the walls still smelled faintly of antiseptic, but the air felt different now. She wasn't waiting anymore. She was welcoming. The volunteer badge on her cardigan caught the light as she leaned toward a woman in the lobby clutching a hospital form the way Sophie once had. The woman's voice trembled when she said, "I'm scared. I don't know if I can do this." Sophie smiled softly, the same way Mia once had, the same way Dr. Quinn used to when her own fear threatened to swallow her. "You don't have to do it alone," she said. "You're stronger than you think. And once you take the first step, the rest won't feel quite as impossible." The woman nodded, a fragile kind of relief passing through her eyes. As Sophie turned, she spotted him, Sebastian, walking down the hall in his white coat, sleeves rolled neatly to his forearms, that calm smile still anchored to his face. Time hadn't dulled it, if anything, it had deepened it. He stopped beside her, slipping his hands into his pockets as he studied the woman Sophie had just spoken to. "You're good at that," he murmured. Sophie shrugged lightly. "I had a good teacher." Their eyes met, and in that quiet look, the whole past year seemed to unfold, the fear, the waiting, the hope, the healing. He tilted his head, a hint of pride in his voice. "Ready to help more people face their fears?" Sophie smiled, her heart steady now. "Yes," she said. "With you." Outside, sunlight streamed through the hospital windows, painting the corridor gold. For the first time, the place that had once symbolized her deepest fear felt like home, not because it had changed, but because she had. If you want to find out what happened next, how the millionaire's family reacted to the shy girl from the bookstore, write it in the comments, and we'll create the continuation just for you. And don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. Rumor says everyone who does will get something good today. Maybe a message. Maybe a smile. Or maybe that small miracle that's already on its way to you.